will be cremated. And he spoke today about the VA funeral coming in a burial ground down in Rowan County, I think. But Dollar said we haven't heard. You want to know or not? He worked from us whenever it happens. I got information for a memoir, but I didn't ask about this. Not a lot of the black community does that. Now, maybe, there's the most Africans.
Oh, yeah. That one thing I noticed. Meeting and message.
I was given one sentence about our speaker tonight that I believe sums up her life very well. Cheryl Harry is a cultural curator whose mission is engaging the community in the presentation and celebration of Black heritage. Cheryl grew up in Winston-Salem, went to North Carolina A&T State University, studying history and turning then to textiles and art. She has served, among other places, and I won't go through all the whole list, as on the Arts Council of Winston-Salem as Vice President for Outreach. She has also worked here for Old Salem, or over there for Old Salem, first as Director of African American Programming, and then as Human Resources Manager. In 2007, she founded the Triad Cultural Arts Incorporated. Now, what is this organization that she founded 14 years ago? It is a nonprofit, community-based, multidisciplinary cultural arts organization bringing recognition to Black American history and culture. There are culturally immersive experiences, including festivals, tours, and special events. And these are sponsored to preserve, interpret, and exhibit the Winston-Salem and Triad heritage of Black Americans for all people. Among the important celebrations under this nonprofit organization is the Juneteenth celebration of Emancipation. And of course, some of you remember being in the St. Philip's Church for the celebration of that about a year ago. The past is always hard to judge. Approximately a year ago. The organization has a monthly newsletter. I have a friend in Asheville who somehow got on their mailing list, and he said, "Is this the same Cheryl Harry that you just talked with the other day?" He was amazed at this coming events kind of newsletter that was sent out at irregular intervals. If you go to the website of Triad Cultural Arts, you'll be offered online tours of Black Winston-Salem history. And it was during one of these, I looked at the program available there on Happy Hill and was inspired by that to ask our speaker to focus on Happy Hill. I was very happy with the historical expertise that I found there. Cheryl Harry has also written a book, Winston-Salem African American Legacy. And this is in 2013. And I checked this evening, and it is available on Amazon in hardback and paperback. It's my hope that Cheryl will help us come to terms with yet another phase of our relationship to our past history as Moravians. Some of this may be difficult to process for some of us, and we are in her hands for this. I'd like to begin with a brief prayer before turning this over to Cheryl. Lord, as we look at our spiritual past, we find many things. We find treasures, we find wisdom. We also find that sometimes our spiritual ancestors did not clearly distinguish between themselves and the world. And the world was too much with them. As we listen tonight, may we listen with open minds and open hearts, and be ready to look at our relationship with our world. Amen. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I am truly, truly honored to be here. And Tom, thank you so much for the invitation. Of course, I'd like to recognize Pastor Jenny Britt. She's may not be here, but I have to acknowledge her. She's such a great. It's not your fault, but there's like an echo in here, but I'm not sure that's 75% of the words, I don't think. And I hate that. Okay. I think it okay. Is it still echoing? Still that echo? It's not a matter of how loud. Oh, right, it's just the echo. All right.
Remember the hard of hearing with your consonants. You could emphasize your consonants, remembering some of the other.
Okay, thank you.
Cheryl, would you take off the body mic and just speak into the mic that's on the left? Just turn off your body mic. Now, just speak into that just a sec.
Okay, is this better? Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Great. So again, thank you, Tom, and to Jenny, of course, to Dr. Wright. Thank you so much. I'm just happy to be here. And Tom gave such a wonderful introduction. So I need to lower your expectations by about 50% here, and we'll have a great evening. As he mentioned, of course, I am a native of Winston-Salem, and I told Tom that I'm just a sort of a community historian. My thing is I just love the history, and I just want to preserve it for future generations and to ensure that the whole story is told. In 2019, the North Carolina School of the Arts, in partnership with the Keenan Institute for the Arts and the Winston-Salem Department of Community Development, received an Our Town grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to support an artist-led cultural restoration project in the Happy Hill neighborhood. I was asked to conduct an asset mapping project in the community. In conducting the asset mapping, we wanted to take the approach of reverse infiltration. Many times, individuals feel that people come into their communities, their neighborhoods, to rob them of their assets instead of building upon them. So we took extra time during this asset mapping, not only to listen to the words of the people that we interviewed, but to hear the hearts of the people. Our objective was to collect the cultural assets important to Happy Hill's current residents, former residents, and those who had any type of affinity to the community. With Happy Hill's long and deep roots in Winston-Salem, our decision was made not to ignore the ties that individuals have to Happy Hill, but to really draw upon them and let them know that their opinions mattered in this collection of data. Happy Hill's cultural heritage has been virtually ignored when development has taken place. This is a historic phenomenon dating back to the 1900s when the southbound railroad cut through Happy Hill and separated it from neighborhood communities to the east, and the historic Schumann House was torn down to make way for a power line right-of-way. Urban renewal took its toll on the neighborhood in the 1950s when 14 blocks at the east and south ends of the community were raised and the first public housing project in Winston-Salem was constructed. It was called Happy Hill Gardens. Then in the 1960s, Highway 52 severed the northeast section of Happy Hill, including part of the graveyard, as well as the new home that had been built for the St. Philip's Moravian Church. With this background in mind, the creation of the Cultural Asset Mapping Implementation Plan was established. The process undertaken to collect data from the community and to develop an asset inventory is one that keeps the community and its strengths and weaknesses in the forefront of every discussion. Many of the residents of Happy Hill, current residents, do not know the rich legacy of the neighborhood, nor the history of the existing tangible assets. Identifying and developing a cultural inventory can lead to an appreciation by both residents inside and outside of the neighborhood. So the tangible assets include the historical properties, artifacts, artist networks, festivals and events, creative industries and occupations, arts programming, and other related activities that occur in Happy Hill. But the intangible assets include the stories and traditions that define Happy Hill's unique identity and sense of place. And this is where we start our talk today, with the history and development of Happy Hill. I will be talking a lot about what I've learned from a text exhibition that was mounted in Old Salem in 1998. It was researched and compiled by Mel White, the former African-American program director at Old Salem. The exhibit was entitled, and is entitled, Across the Creek from Salem, The Story of Happy Hill, 1816 to 1952. So we'll talk a little bit about the history, and many of you already know this. When Salem was established in 1766, outlying farms were designated to provide commodities. One of these farms was called the Salem Farm and was located across Salem Creek on 300 acres of what we now know as Happy Hill. In 1815, when Dr. Frederick Henry Schuman moved from Bethania to Salem, he brought with him an enslaved woman and her children. And because regulations prohibited individuals in Salem from owning enslaved people, he had to live outside of town. So Dr. Schuman leased the Salem farm. A new house was built for him. Dr. Schuman purchased additional enslaved people, and that farm became very successful. In 1836, Dr. Schuman decided to move into town, and he manumitted 17 people, with an additional 6 other free people from Salem in the group, and he paid their passage to Liberia in West Africa. A love feast was held for the group before they departed at the African Log Church, of course, right down the street. So a lot of people think that the Schuman Farm was the Negro Quarter, but actually the quarter was where enslaved Africans lived that were owned by the church. Records state that the farm was about 1.5 miles southeast of Salem Square, and it shows that it was probable in the area around the vicinity of Sunnyside. So it's not clear where all enslaved people were living, but based on the Moravian diaries, Brother Steiner held church services in early 1822 in the Negro Quarter, the paper mill, which we know is in the Peters Creek area, another farm over by, I have Piedmont Bible College, so I'm dating myself, but you know, it used to be Piedmont Bible College, and the Schuman Farm, which is in Happy Hill. So we know that church services were held there during the 1800s. The Negro Quarter was where the Negro church services were held when Black and white Moravians stopped worshiping together. An African Moravian congregation, of course, was organized in 1822, and the formal organization of the congregation occurred 2 months later on May 5th, 1822, at the farm that we know as Piedmont Bible College. And this date is the anniversary date for the St. Philip's Moravian Church. And we all know that they're coming up on their 250th. And there are several diary entries about white ministers making visits to Black members who lived in the quarter. One I'm familiar with was Pleasant. Pleasant would not join the Moravian Church. And Brother Steiner, of course, made visits to her, but she never joined the Moravian Church. Now, according to the 1860 census, the population in Forsyth County was comprised of 10,707 white people, 1,985 Blacks, 1,766 of whom were enslaved, and 219 were free. Now, in Salem District, the population was 1,894 whites, 418 enslaved people, 10 free people, and 85 slave houses in and around the Salem District. At the dawn of the Civil War in 1860, a new Moravian brick church was built. And as the Civil War raged, Black Moravians began to feel this sense of freedom. And according to Scott Rohr, they became assertive in their demands. They wanted to hold their own prayer meetings because the church was governed by white Moravians. And they wanted services where they were free to be expressive during the worship service and not so quiet. Scott Rohr's book, Freedom of the Lord, states that the congregation and the pastor were at a standoff. Black members were no closer to gaining control of their religious services. However, a talented cadre of leaders were emerging in 1864 that would have the skills necessary to carry the struggle to a successful conclusion in the post-war period. And in 1870, the records state that the supervision of the White Board of Elders would be terminated and that the current arrangement made in the, quote, slave days no longer fulfilled its purpose, and that the colored congregation would be separated from the white congregation. So on April 3rd, 1870, brothers Alexander Vogler, Louis Hagee, and Benjamin Zevely were formally installed as leaders for the colored congregation. Also after the Civil War, newly freed African Americans made requests to buy land in Salem on which to build homes. However, some of the white residents did not want Blacks living in the town of Salem. However, at the prompting of E.A. Vogler, who had served as the Sunday school superintendent at the African church, the board agreed to sell land, and in 1872, they began selling half-acre lots on the former Schumann farm for $10 each. This became the first planned African-American neighborhood in the city, although it was an enclave to itself as a separate place from the adjacent town of Salem. The church leaders here called the community Liberia, and they believed that that could have possibly been inspired by Schumann's liberation of his enslaved people. Around 1876, the name Happy Hill became far more common than Liberia, and particularly among the community members. So there is no record of who started calling it Happy Hill or when they started calling it Happy Hill. You'll hear people have all kinds of, the imagination can just run wild, but there's no record of who decided that it was called Happy Hill and why. So the people who settled Happy Hill, of course, were all African Americans, though some were designated as mulatto. which is biracial. And according to oral history, some could pass as white. After 1872, people moved into Happy Hill in 3 waves. Many of the first arrivals were descendants from the slaves of the Salem Congregation and of the local Moravian families. These included, and I'm just going to mention 2 of those people, Richard Sivers and Ned Limley. They purchased the first 2 lots. So I just wanted to take a little time to personalize these individuals and for you to begin to paint a picture in your mind of their humanity and their legacy. So I'm going to start with Ned Limley, Edward Ned Limley. He was born into slavery in 1826. He was a Moravian and was active in the Brick Church, which was later named St. Philip's. In 1867, he married 20-year-old Alice Stiers from Virginia. Ned and Alice had 11 children, but only 3 of those children survived childhood. According to the U.S. Census in 1870, he was working on a farm in a community, the Broad Bay Township, which was southeast of Salem. In 1872, he purchased one of the first 2 lots on Happy Hill and built a house. And after moving to Happy Hill, he worked at the Freeze Woolen Mill. He died at age 65 in 1891. His wife, Alice, continued living in the house until her death around 1911, and her gravestone is still visible in the Happy Hill Cemetery. The next person I'm going to talk about is Addie Sivers, and I'm going to do that by way of her parents first. Mr. Richard Sivers and Miss Anna Foltz were born to enslaved families in Salem. He in 1838 and she in 1848. Now, Richard worked in the cabinet-making shop of John Sivers. Anna was the granddaughter of Phoebe and Bodney, who were the founding members of the African American congregation that, of course, became St. Philip's. Married in 1866, Richard and Anna had 3 sons and a daughter, Adelaide Gertrude, or Addie, who was born in 1870. In 1872, Richard bought the lot next to Ned Limley's lot at the top of the hill. 4 years later, at age 28, Anna died. A baptized Moravian, Anna was buried in the second colored graveyard, which is near God's Acre in Salem, and it's been renamed. Her oldest child was 9, and her daughter Addie was only 6. So by age 14, Addie Sivers was on her own. She was a domestic for the B.F. Crossland family on Main Street in Salem. She purchased the family Happy Hill lot in 1904, and that's presumably when her father died, but may have moved there later. Now, a year later, she gave birth to her only son, who was Theodore or Teddy Roosevelt Sivers. No one knows for sure who Teddy's father was. In 1910, Miss Addie was working for and living with the Henry Freeze family in Salem. There she worked as a cook, living on Cascade Avenue. By 1921, she was working for the Womble family in Winston's West End. There she cared for the 6 Womble children and did the laundry, pressing linens with flat irons heated on a pot-bellied stove in the basement. Teddy got a job as an elevator operator. In 1929, Ms. Sivers actually built a large wooden house on her Happy Hill lot. Many remember it as the finest house in the neighborhood. The Wombles, of course, assisted with the financing. Addie Sivers and her son, both baptized Moravians, attended St. Philip's Church and Sunday school and participated in other church activities. But according to a memoir written by church members, Teddy later fell in with bad company, which led him astray. Tragedy struck in 1933 when Teddy fell off the southbound railroad trestle and died. Some children actually found his body on their way to school. No one knows how he fell, but some suspect that he may have been drinking. But Lila Wumble Jenkins, who was a teenager at the time, remembers that Addie, his mother, was just absolutely devastated. She became a much quieter person, and she cried all the time. She's just remembered as just adoring her son. Addie Sivers remained in her fine house until 1954. We don't know if she moved away, if she passed on. No one quite remembers. But there is a picture of Addie Sivers in the brick church in Salem. It's the St. Philip's Church on the second floor. And you would be able to see a picture of her and her son, Teddy. I just wanted to take another moment to really talk about Phoebe, because Addie was a descendant of Phoebe and Bodney, who of course are considered the founders of the African Moravian Church. And now I want to just sort of try and paint a picture of Phoebe. She has such a great story. She was born about 1771, and she was enslaved in Bethania by George Hauser. From 1810 until her death in 1861, Phoebe lived in Salem, except, of course, when she went to live with her daughter, Betsy. Phoebe was the property of the Wachovia administration. She, along with her husband, was purchased, and two of her young children. The purchase was made by the Wachovia administration in Salem for $800, and that was for her husband, and her two children. The slave chattels record the purchase as Bodney was a Negro man about 54 years old. Phoebe, Bodney's wife, was about 39 years old. And Kathy, a Negro girl, about 6 years old, and Emmanuel, a Negro boy, about 4 years old. It also mentions that Phoebe was with child when she was purchased. And it was stated that if Phoebe were to die in childbirth, that the purchaser would be refunded $250. Now, we think that Phoebe and Bodney were possibly Native Africans, but we know that they were leaders of the African community in Salem and respected by the entire Salem community. They were two of the first three communicants of the African church, and John Emmanuel was that third communicant. Although Phoebe and Bodney were confirmed Moravians, there's no evidence that they were given new names at their baptism, as was the custom. So Mel White suggests that by not giving them new names, there was a confidence and trust in them that was bestowed by the white people of the community. And he referred to Phoebe as the first mother of the African Moravian Church. Phoebe and Bodney had 9 children during their lifetime. Bodney was buried in God's Acre and was the last African American to be buried prior to the segregation of burials when Negro God's Acre was established in 1816. The Unity administration exhibited much confidence in Bodney and Phoebe, purchasing most of their 9 children, and by placing Bodney in charge of the administration's slave quarter or Negro quarter. Phoebe remained faithful to the memory of her husband Bodney when he passed away. It says that she did it in actions as well. He was buried in the Negro God's Acre. His headstone was one of the ones removed from the graveyard in 1913 during the beautification project, and it was among those found during the restoration of the church in the 1990s. Phoebe was buried in the second colored cemetery, which is located at the intersection of Salem Avenue and Cemetery Street, and her grave is visible there today. Her headstone is marked with a WA, indicating that she was the property of the Wachovia administration. Phoebe, when she passed away, her service was so large that her service was actually held at the home church. Whenever I'm in the visitor center at Old Salem, the organ that's there would have been the one that would have been played at Phoebe's funeral. So I always think of Phoebe whenever I'm in the visitor center. Now, the second wave of people moving into Happy Hill came between 1880 and 1910. Among them were Harvey Alexander and Mr. Columbus Pitts. He migrated here from Cabarrus and Cabarrus County. Their children were able to find tobacco factory and domestic jobs in the growing towns of Winston and Salem. And the last arrivals came between 1910 and 1920. They were born in other North Carolina counties and nearby states, and they came to work in the expanding industrial city of Winston-Salem. Now, Happy Hill grew steadily between 1880 and 1910, but the largest growth came between 1910 and 1920 with the opening of the area around Pine Street, or the Pines. The 1920 census provides a detailed picture of the community. In that year, about 130 working-class families lived on the 15 city blocks. Over half of the residents owned their own homes. Many adults worked in the tobacco factories, but some worked in the furniture industry or lumber yards. Still others were listed as farmers, day laborers, barbers, drivers, domestic workers, laundress, and more. And the third person that I want to talk with you about today is Mr. Wade Bidding Sr. He was born about 1886, and he was the son of Henry and Mary Bell Morrison Bidding. He was baptized in the Moravian Church in 1895. In 1909, he married Josephine Still, and they moved to a house at the bottom of Liberia Street over in Happy Hill. Later, the family purchased a home at the corner of Alexander and Alder Streets. Wade Bidding worked his whole life in the tobacco factories making plug chewing tobacco. He later became a member of the St. James Methodist Episcopal Church. And Josephine, his wife, worked at Salem Academy in the laundry room, and she attended Rising Ebenezer Baptist Church. But in the private life of Mr. Wade, he was known as the political activist of Happy Hill. Until the 1930s, people walking between Happy Hill and Salem had to cross Salem Creek on rocks. The crossing was dangerous. Matilda McKinney fell and broke her ankle there, and Wade successfully petitioned the city, and he had a bridge constructed, and that's that metal truss bridge, and about 3 weeks ago, it was named in his honor. He later fought to have the creek undergrowth cleared to reduce the rat and mosquito problem, and he drew up a petition which resulted in the building of the playground and the first Happy Hill Recreation Center. Wade Bidding also fought to get street signs and house numbers so that the Postal Service could deliver mail. In about 1940, he bought the numbers himself, and he and his neighbors put them up. Wade is also remembered for playing the big baritone sax in the Gold Leaf Marching Band and for running a food store at the bottom of Liberia Street. He managed the Black Twins baseball team, which went on to become the New York Black Yankees. Wade and his wife had a large family of 10 children. 3 of the 10, Wade, Kathleen, and Paul, still live in Winston-Salem. The towns of Winston and Salem merged in 1913. Ironically, that next year, the African Moravian Church was named St. Philip's, and that's about, during that year, the gravestones were taken up. Prior to the church being named St. Philip's, the church was called the Slave Church, the Black Church, the Negro Church, the Colored Church, or the African Church. Once Winston-Salem was established, Happy Hill literally disappeared from the city map. In the age of Jim Crow segregation, it was not unusual for city fathers to set corporate lines to eliminate the African-American presence in the city. So we are going to fast forward now to 1950, and we're going to talk about a little about Happy Hill Gardens. Construction in the 1950s of the Happy Hill Gardens was the city's first public housing development. Excuse me. Happy Hill Gardens was a 488-unit complex owned and managed by the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem. It was developed for low-income families. In 2003, the Housing Authority was awarded a HOPE 6 grant, and it was $18.2 million. It was awarded by the Department of the Housing and Urban Development, which included remaking Happy Hill Gardens into a mixed-income community. All 488 existing public housing units were demolished and replaced with new housing. Alders Point, which is a seniors complex in Happy Hill, has 100 units. It opened in 2006. Providence Place Apartments has 56 units. It also opened in 2006. And Willows Peak Apartments has 116 units, which opened in 2007. So now a lot of the housing has not been replaced. When the HOPE 6 project started, a lot of the people were displaced. They had to move. They were told they could come back, and that has not happened. And people are still not feeling very good about that. But there's a lot of land, empty land, over in Happy Hill, and several developers have looked at what that could possibly be. And the community wants housing there, so we're very hopeful that plans, something will happen very soon. Of course, we know COVID hit, so that's put a lot of things behind, but there are plans to develop that land over there. Just need to do a quick check here. Habitat Homes, the plan for a new community in Happy Hill was introduced in 2002. And the Winston-Salem Area Plan recommended affordable housing and home ownership, which would include subsidized and market at rate units, renter and owner occupied units, apartments, townhouses, and single-family homes. So the Habitat homes have been built. In 2003, 4 homes were built on Alexander Street and 1 on Pitts Street. If you hear those names, Alexander and Pitts, those were names of people who were early inhabitants of Happy Hill. In 2004, 2 homes were built on Liberia Street, and then another 3 homes were built on Pitt Street and 1 on Humphrey Street. And then in 2006, there was 1 on Humphrey. 2008, 2 more homes were added on Pitt Street. In 2009, 3 more homes were added over there on Liberia and Humphrey Street. So the community is being stabilized. The homeowners that are there are very proud homeowners, and the community is beginning to get that sort of mixed occupied look over there with homes. You do have some homes that cost a couple $100,000 over there. That was another part of trying to build this sort of mixed community. As far as the demographics go, the community was founded with freed slaves by freed slaves of African descent. Happy Hill now has residents of different cultural and economic backgrounds, and based on the data from the Statistical Atlas, which comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, specifically from the 2010 census and from the 2012-2016 American Community Survey, the community in Happy Hill now is 71 or 72% Black, 12% white, 10% Hispanic, 1% Asian, and 4% mixed. The workforce has remained relatively the same, with most residents in low-wage occupations. We look at some of the assets. In 2016, Old Salem received a National Historic Landmark designation. Included were contributing and non-contributing resources in Happy Hill. The recognition of portions of Happy Hill in the National Historic Landmark is based on archaeology, so the entire street grid of the old neighborhood is not included. But some of the extracts from the National Historic Landmark include the road system from 1766 as a contributing factor. This was surveyed following the Civil War. Also, the Salem Creek and tributaries are contributing to the National Historic Landmark. Across Salem Creek to the southeast, the Salem Farm was established on that 300-acre tract. The Salem Farm, or the Schumann Plantation, is a contributing factor. Happy Hill, Liberia is a contributing factor. The Metal Truss Bridge is a contributing factor. Liberia Street, also known as the road to Salem Plantation, is a contributing factor. Pitts Street, also known as High Street. The bottom Happy Hill Park was also a contributing factor. The Brother Spring or Brethren Spring is a contributing factor. The Happy Hill Cemetery, which is located on Willow Street, is a contributing factor. The cemetery, of course, was cut through when 52 came through in the 60s. The bottom of Happy Hill Park is a contributing site as well. In terms of historic markers, Happy Hill has the distinction of 3 historic markers in the neighborhood. Annually, the Historic Resources reviews numerous applications, so for Happy Hill to have 3 markers is really amazing. 2009, Happy Hill was recognized as community. 2017, the Brother Spring and the African School was recognized, and in 2019, Salem and Liberia, Africa, were recognized. Let's skip over real quick here, because we want to have some time for discussion. Just some of the survey data. People felt the strengths of the community were the annual reunion, homeowners, people owned homes, they had affordable housing. Some of the unmet needs were restaurant, revitalization. They feel that gentrification may happen there as well. And some of the challenges, well, if you're living in the apartments, the management, turnover is great, the community center is too small, things like that. You know what, most people, they want a livable community just like everybody else. So, Happy Hill is alive and well, trust me. We have so many people that are working to make sure that that historic community is preserved. And of course, the history of Happy Hill, with the Moravian Church, you know, whenever something happening, people there feel a connection to Salem. They really do. So, thank you. Yes. Is Rolling Hills? No, Rolling Hills is, yes. The question is Rolling Hills an apartment community in Happy Hill? No, it isn't. Rolling Hills is on, I think, New Walkertown Road. It's a separate community. Has nothing to do with Happy Hill. Thank you. Is the Happy Hill Neighborhood Association different from Triad Cultural Arts? Oh, the Happy Hill Arts? Right, yes. Triad Cultural Arts is different from the Happy Hill Neighborhood Association. Yeah, the neighborhood, Happy Hill Neighborhood Association actually did the drumming.
Celebration for Juneteenth, and they were awarded something. I don't know if that's part of your program.
Gee, you know what, I do not, it's okay. I wonder if that was Wayne Jones, maybe? They were doing drumming and dancing?
No, these were the painters.
Oh, they were painters at Carter G. Woodson? No.
They were part of the after-school program.
Oh, the after-school program.
He showed me the article and the article that goes, this is my daughter, and I paint also, but she got the award for the painting. I wondered if that was.
Okay, I don't know.
The art contest was part of yours.
No,
She had a showing or something.
we did, well, you know, Owens Daniels did an exhibition at the Milton Roads that was part of the Juneteenth celebration. Owens Daniels, he's a photographer. Oh, a female. Okay. It's not, yes, sir.
Could you speak more about the potential for development to occur in the neighborhood, both potentially beyond housing, and then also the role and contribution of residents of the neighborhood to contribute to those conversations and take leadership in them?
Okay. The question was, can I speak more to the development efforts that are happening in Happy Hill and the role of the residents to contribute to that development? Actually, today, I was out riding with a group of young men, African-American men, that are interested in doing some development in Happy Hill. They are very impressed with the historic, the fabric of the community, and really want to build on that. So there are a lot of groups that have been interested in doing development in Happy Hill. And I honestly do not know what happens with the breakdown on that. I do know that the land is, over there is sort of tied, and, you know, you got city property, you got housing authority property, you got private development property over there. So it's hard to sort of work through all of those channels, but I know that the Housing Authority was trying to sort of break down some of those obstacles. The neighborhood is very involved in the development, in the talks. There was a group that came right before COVID that had planned to put some townhouses over right off of Alder Street. That's sort of the entrance into Happy Hill. And the Housing Authority did have them meet with what they felt were the stakeholders in the community, which were the Neighborhood Association as well as Triad Cultural Arts, because our organization is interested in, of course, preservation and commemoration, and we're trying to preserve 2 shotgun houses that are in the community there that we want to make into a heritage site that's up on Humphrey Street. So we were invited in, along with the Liberian Organization of the Piedmont as well, to have input into the planning for the development that was about to happen. COVID happened, and we haven't heard anything else.
Are there churches in Happy Hill?
There's, can't think of the name of the church, but there's a small church over there, and then there's Rising Ebenezer, which is the historic church there. When St. Philip's moved over to Happy Hill, or they built a church, they were up on Vargrave and Mark Street. If you know where Vargrave is, where Mark intersects, that's where the St. Philip's Church was built, because, you know, they were having church over in the recreation center in Happy Hill when they left Salem, and then they moved there, and of course the highway came through, and they ended up on Bonaire, but now they're back in Salem, right, which is great. Yes?
That need to live in that area. So that's November 4th. I think it's from 12:30 to 1:30. Betsy Wanda, I think, put it up.
Right. Yeah, there will be a panel. She was asking about the panel discussion that will be held on urban planning. That there's a group called, I used to be a part of that group. It's a group that's interested in reparations and reconciliation in Winston-Salem. So they're doing a panel discussion about urban planning and what happens to a lot of the lower income communities when development happens. So Martha Hartley is a part. Martha Hartley and Willard Bass will be moderating the panel. Patrice Toney with the City of Winston-Salem, and another planner from the City of Winston-Salem will be on the panel. And then I think there are a couple of urban planners from UVA, I believe, and that is November 4th. Yes, that's in our Common Events newsletter, and anybody that would like to sign up for that, let me know. Several years ago, I just started doing an events newsletter. It started with the Martin Luther King celebration. We just wanted to get information out. I think it's probably been about 10 or 15 years now. So I started personally doing a newsletter that listed urban events, and we just sent them out just so people would know what was going on. And of course, I chose things that I liked a lot that were in the newsletter. But Triad Cultural Arts now has taken on that newsletter, and we send out something once a month that will talk about urban interests, any events that are going on in the community. When you all had the soprano here for, yes, things like that. We cover anything that we find out about that has an urban or African-American interest to it. So please send us information and visit our website and sign up. Yes? He asked about the churches that were developed when the St. Philip's Church started in 1822, and when they were meeting around in communities, you figure that there was music, and what was that like? Dr. Jenny Britt, can you help me with this? They would probably have been singing, your traditional hymns. A lot of people who were enslaved here spoke German because a lot of the Moravians didn't speak English. And in fact, several that worked at the tavern served as interpreters for the Moravians there. So they would have done hymns. At the log church, Johann Samuel's son, Christian Samuel. Johann Samuel was the first enslaved person purchased by the church, his children, of course. This family was to be sort of the model family, and their children learned classical music. They played violin, string instruments, chamber music. So the music was very German. Yes, oh yes, you can tell. Oh yes, thank you. Right, so, yes,
Well, my grandmother grew up in Salem, went to this church. She was born in 1903, and as a young married woman, she used to hide on the front porch across from Washington Park so she could listen to the African-American people singing, and she didn't want anybody to know that she was doing it.
in 1903, your grandmother used to listen to music. Okay.
My grandmother, when she turned 18, she was born in 1903.
Oh, okay.
But she was married when she turned 18, and as a young married woman, she would hide on the front porch and listen to the singing of an African-American group of folks down in the Washington Park. She was embarrassed for anyone to know she was doing it.
Oh, okay, so she loved listening to the music that was happening in the African-American churches. Okay, right, yeah. There are records that, they didn't like, some Moravians didn't like those Methodist practices in the church. So there was some lively music at times when they let the Methodist ministers come in. Okay. Again, thank you all. I appreciate your listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Next week, we're going to hear from Daniel Cruz. He is going to start us off in a 2-week series about the Trail of Tears, and then Graham Wrights will follow up the following week. Thank you all.
I kept saying Jenny Britt, and it's Jenny Tobias. I'm sorry. I used to work with Jenny Britt. I'm sorry. I've been talking about Jenny Tobias the whole time.